Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jon Myer Podcast. Now, today's topic is all about CI/CD, and we're navigating the CI/CD landscape, making the best choice for your team. And joining me again is Mark Freydl, who is the co-founder and CEO of CODIAC. Mark, thanks for joining me.
Thanks. Glad to be here, John.
Okay, Mark, let me give a little bit of backstory. We know CI/CD has been around before DevOps. In our last episode, we talked about DevOps being, 13, 14, 2006. What are we, 20 years now going on there? All right, we'll just say less than 20 years. CI/CD is actually part of DevOps. And before we get into our discussion, how about we define what CI/CD is?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of definitions. I think if you ask around, a lot of different people say different things about it, just because it's a big topic. But I'll give you a definition. Let's put it in context. We're a development team. We've got a bunch of folks doing a bunch of work on various different parts of the code base. Maybe they're working together simultaneously on the same part of the code base. At some point, you want to build and deploy that thing, get it out to the world, that piece of software. So sometimes one person and another person are working on the same little line of code, and you have to basically get the gold standard. What is the ultimate version of this thing without any staleness or without missing that thing that other guy did? So CI/CD is a great way to do that. You say, okay, we have this one place for our team, and everybody's going to submit code to that one place, the source control. And then we're going to merge that source control, however we do it. There's a lot of different formulas for that. And then we're going to take that version, that centralized version with everything that we know should be included, build the thing, and then put it out. Now, that's the CI part, which would be a continuous integration part, which is that's a small portion of it. But that's basically like on a regular basis, every time we're cyclically, periodically, iteratively putting up new versions of our code, we're rebuilding that stuff. And we're putting it out from a central source so that we know it is the standard that we need. And then the CD portion is the continuous delivery or continuous deployment, depending on how you look at it or who you're talking to. But the continuous deployment says, well, as a company, we focus on making sure that our software is always deployable, no matter what state or whatever state we're in or whatever sequence of the workflow and the process that we're in. Our stuff is always going to be deployable, and it's deployable repeatedly with a single click or with a quick button push or some sort of swoop of a transaction to any of our environments, any of the versions that we need out there at any given point. So basically what we have with a CI and CD together is we cyclically and repeatedly generate new versions of our code. That stuff mashes itself together. We see to it that it then gets out to the world. That's basically the big notion there.
Mark, I know the huge value of the CI portion, right? A single source of truth, the golden standard. And what used to happen is you would write a section of code, I would write a section of code, and then we would merge it separately together, and then one of us would push it to that location. And what happened is it was huge error prone, right? The error rates were through the roof. You would deploy something out, and then all of a sudden your app didn't work. The website was down 404 and everything. And that allows a faster time, speed to it. And then the deployment aspect of it is that one click, and you can go through a huge automation. You can have manual intervention, you can have reviews and everything, but the automation. What is the value of integrating and adopting the CI/CD portion of it?
To the business, there's a lot of if you look at it from the perspective of business value for our ability to produce our software. Like, let's just say I'm a company that has software. In fact, we rely on our software. We make our money on it. The kids that are eating at my table are eating food generated from the money that came from that software. Everybody in the group is doing that. So it's extremely important how well we compete, how well we put that out. And that's basically the heart and soul of the business. So when that process that you were just describing, if it were such that on a daily basis, John and Michael are banging heads against each other because they're tripping over each other on whose code made it to the build or not. Hey, I put a change out, and what happened to it? Well, I don't know. Mike, you overwrote my code. What the hell just happened? You've been there before, right? that
Yep.
process, that we have answers for that. I mean, the software community in general is always so cool to watch because everybody's coming up with answers for this kind of stuff because nobody wants to deal with this nonsense. And it can really snowball and go on a regular basis. I mean, you've been there, right?
Yep.
It's like, and it's funny too, because we talk about CI/CD in general as one of those points where you can always commiserate with people. And like, look, if you want to just sort of make a connection, you can always just dig a little bit in a conversation until you find somebody saying, oh yeah, there was this one time and this silly thing happened and it was so bad we all just couldn't believe. And there's usually some sort of sense of sardonic humor in there, because sometimes you can really get yourself into hell because they're not just sideline jobs. Like I said, this is the primary action of your company to get this stuff out. So that process really needs to be thought about. You need to be able to have that team together that knows how to work together to make that sort of deployment a smooth running operation. And that's true for any system that you talk about, but this one in particular, I think I don't know. You've probably had experiences where you're in the middle of a conversation with somebody from the management side, and they're not entirely tech, and you're not entirely tuned into what their needs are at the moment, and there's a sort of maybe a minor little gap in understanding between the technology side and the management side, and in the process of doing that, something comes out where the pieces don't quite fit together, and it's just one little bit of friction, but it comes up at 3:00 in the morning, when you thought that, you had the weekend all figured out, and no, you got a call and now you're up at 3 in the morning trying to fix something that, really happened during at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Well, how are we fixing that at 3:00 in the morning? Because they're complex problems, So anyway, lots of value there in terms of how fast does our company move? How aggressive can we go after new markets? How well can we stay ahead of our competitors? How responsive can we be to our customers? Are they going to like us better than the next guys? All that stuff matters, and all of that stuff comes down to how well we do the software thing. CI/CD is a really big part of that.
Now, Mark, we're talking about CI/CD, and a lot of people adopt it, right? Most companies adopt it, or some companies adopt it. But in your professional opinion, should everybody adopt it, or is it for everybody?
I think you could pose the argument either way. Some people like to use it all over the place, like to use it first stop. I think a lot of people that have been burned a lot by that process we were just talking about will say, hey, you know what? Next time we're going to get the automated builds up front, the first thing. I think there's a good argument on paper to say, if you're starting something brand new, fresh, out of the box, don't bother with features until you've got your process set, and then you can build your features inside your process. Everything runs a lot smoother, and that all sounds good to everybody, and a plan always looks good from the outside. It just doesn't always seem to happen that way. It doesn't. We get busy, we have a lot to do, and the fact is, especially in a new business or a new piece of software, the need for features is so important. I mean, if you ever been a consultant and you're working on a new project, and you get the agreement to do a thing, and delivery is what we planned it to be, but that you have to deliver some very visible things in order to keep the expectations going and the customer happy and all that. And trying to tell a customer that, well, the first 4 weeks, all we're going to do is it doesn't take 4 weeks, but the first few weeks, all we're going to do is sort of mechanics that you're never going to see that have more to do with sort of background scripting or whatever. And no, we don't have the login page. We don't have a hello world yet. We've been working on process. You can't do that. So those forces come into play a lot, and so should everybody do it? I think on the build of the CI portion of it, I think everybody should at some point do that. If you're a one person team and you're under some kind of deadline to get things done, and you're working off your local machine, and it's by me for me kind of software, CI/CD is going to get in your way in the first few months of your project, depending on what you're doing. But as you mature, if this is a product that you need to work with on a team, it really is something that you should be getting into. And I want to specify too, especially for the build. If you have any more than one person working on this thing, get yourself a CI/CD pipeline for the build. You don't have to build the deployment for it, but get that build together, get that container built, and get that centralized source control management concept together, just so that, hey, if you and I are working on this thing, John, we're going to knock heads if we don't have that piece figured out. And it's that's very simple on one app. So if you're doing multiple apps, different story.
Mark, I actually use the same methodology for video and content editing. I actually have a multiple team and we use a cloud base because here's what
Yeah.
happens. I may edit the video and he may edit the video. And then all of a sudden we each have different parts or different sections of it. We're editing the same piece of content so we can save time, not so I can drop it in there. And the beginning part of it is to make it efficient. You're not stepping on toes, just like it is with any type of code or deployment. Mark, my next question for the CI CD portion of it, is there ever a time when you just implement CI?
All the time. I mean, I think CI is, like I said, CI is an essential part of the software process. And to me, if nothing else, it's a great way to make sure that you have a good version of the stuff that you're working for. So again, back to, I mean, I was mentioning this as a CI CD description, but in general, as a software company, one of the things that we want to make sure that we're always aware of and are capable of doing is making sure that we have a product that we can deploy. It may not have all the features that we need, but at any given moment, we do have a functional product and we can put that thing out. CI is a really big part of that. So on a daily basis, multiple times a day, do you want to gather all sorts of things up by hand and check it and make sure that, well, I got this, I got that? Get your CI/CD, your CI build together, and let that thing just run in the background every time you walk through your branching strategy. And that's it's a great add right off the bat. Real quick, real easy. Shouldn't say real quick, real easy. It's a pain in the ass. But especially when you're getting started, you can keep it at a minimum and whatnot. But
Well, Mark, before you actually mentioned that everything looks great on paper, right? You're doing so much behind the background. Oh, yeah, we're just getting all of our processes and everything together. Well, implementing CI CD, it's great. It looks great on paper. I can do all this stuff and do all the thing, but how do you really successfully implement each part of it?
by hand and with time. I think the thing that's always troubled me and what's been always, I think, the balance in the there's the big promise. Like on paper, it's a fantastic idea. It's a great pattern. Before we were doing it, we were running around just banging into each other. But at the same time, you do have to weigh, like I was mentioning, some of the challenges of putting it up. And you say, well, it's not really hard. I build a little YAML file, or depending on what CI/CD pipeline system you're using, some of them are drag drop, some of them are data driven. But I put my little pipeline together, and I say, okay, here's my code, and here's my passwords to get into my code, and here's a couple secrets that I need for some database connections, and here's a couple other things that we have to just sort of assemble it, put it all together. Not too long. If you do a lot of it, you might be copying and pasting from other ones you've done, but which is always a pretty good start. But again, even doing that, it's even if you have, hey, I've got this pipeline working. It works for this other service. Well, we just made another service that's pretty much like it. Drop it in there. It's not going to work out of the box. It isn't going to work out of the box. We place bets a lot on that. We're like, okay, I think that should be it. All right, you want to put something on it? You want to, because it's not going to work the first time, and if it does, hey, that's a big bonus. You got to play the odds. But the fact is, it's iterative. Okay, try it again, run it again. What was that? Oh, that's what it's missing. The other thing, oh, it couldn't authenticate to this other thing. So you work on them. Yep. Okay, one service, everything I just said, that's totally worth it. When you have two services, you're double the effort, right? And now I have 3 services and 4 services. And we talk to companies that got 30, 150, 250 services. What are you doing at that point? Who's doing those CI/CD pipelines? Are we, and especially in a case where, I mean, have you written CI/CD pipelines and stuff like that? Have
Yep.
you done anything?
Yeah, I actually have written a number of them within AWS and integrated them because I like the whole flow of it. We used AWS Landing Zone, actually use those, which are called like stack sets as they break through the entire process as you upload code to S3 or to a location, and then it deploys it out throughout all your entire accounts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they're all different, right? And
Yep.
they're all different in that, like, there's a lot to do. Like you were just saying, like you have to tie it into your code, you have to tie it into your process, you have to tie it into this other data over here. And oh, that's right, we're on AWS, and so where are we deploying to? We might want to tie it into our accounts. They're all different because there's just so many issues to solve. But really, what that sort of cycles back to is the person building it. When you're building it, you have to engage all those different issues. You're the glue that has to say, hey, I'm doing this. And some of these pipelines it's kind of like somebody's handing you a wood block and they're like, okay, make a statue. And you're like, okay, great. We'll try that. Check. Let's try that. Let's try. And you get this beautiful thing done that finally works that one day. And unlike a statue, it doesn't work the same way tomorrow, because for whatever reason, the thing that you were reaching out to in those pipelines may change. The software that you were using may change. The way you set it up might change. Where some of the passwords, some of the other components and third party systems that you're using, something may change. And pipelines for that reason are very typically fragile. And so again, back to where, this really does, I think, make a lot of sense. This, my opinion on this, it's a really strong one, but that when you look at the build process, and this is why I was sort of separating the CI/CD thing, is that the build process tends to be pretty static. It's my code base. My code base isn't going to change very often, or at least my source control location isn't going to change very often. That repo is that repo, and it's going to be that repo probably for the life of the software, unless we decide to change languages or something. Where I'm going to deploy this thing, the container, for instance, if I'm building into a container, where are my container registries? Those may change, but again, really not very often, if ever. And so if you can hold the ground underneath you from shaking, then your CI/CD pipeline or your CI pipeline has a pretty good chance of staying relatively consistent. Tokens timeout, and companies that you're operating against tend to change their processes, and versions of the software that you're using to build tend to change. But in general, that's not bad. It's not changing too much. So those build pipelines are relatively stable.
Well, speaking of deployment, you and I were actually talking offline, and you mentioned the deployment, the continuous deployment, the CDI portion is the new frontier. Why is that?
For that reason that I was just saying, the CD portion of it, the development, let's put it this way, we're living in an age of environments on demand. It's like that. And in those days when your team would say, hey, we're going to build a development environment. Okay, great. How many servers do we want? How do we want to set that up? And we go off and we build it. How often are we going to change the development environment? Not often, because it took a lot of people, a lot of effort, and a lot of time and detail and meticulous work to put it together. But today we script those things. And anybody that's a Terraform jockey is going to tell you, like, look, we can repeat that stuff. In fact, we build it to be repeatable. And so when you say, I want a development environment, you can say, you know what, give me 5. You know what? The next day you come back and I didn't mean 5, I meant 3. And snip, take them off, and they're down. And so now that we have automated infrastructure that can build up environments and put them in various places and do it repeatably, and instead of taking a few days of coordination and possibly days of development time, engineering time, they take a second of a button click. And so now if your pipelines are static and they're designed by hand, like they're carved out of that block of wood, like that's not a very repeatable process. And let's just say I've got 35 pipelines. If I have one little change, like, oh, the server address for the dev environment changed, I'm like, oh crap, I got to go 35 pipelines. I got to go update to do it. Well, do you want to, let's go back to that process again. Like, it's not like, oh, I can just open up the panel and just kind of make some changes. It's like, yeah, you can. But remember, that panel is powering your entire livelihood. So everybody in your team is relying on that panel. And you're going to go in there and just change one thing and it's going to be okay? Like, maybe not.
Want to place a bet on that?
Yeah, I mean, at some point you get enough experience to know to be timid. There are times when fear helps you, right?
Yes.
And
especially don't deploy that code on Friday.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff is, we have those nervous system reactions to things like that because we've been through it, right? And so if you're building a pipeline of that, building something out of a block of wood of that much importance, and then you have a CD portion of it that has to keep up with the changing landscape of, there were 3 development environments yesterday, and today there's only 2. In fact, this morning there was 7, and they bounce around because our guys do a lot of spikes and they add and remove environments all the time. Well, what are you going to ask the CI/CD pipeline guy to keep up with that by hand? I mean, that's crazy. It just doesn't fit. And so when you can parameterize it and you can play a lot of games with it, but if anybody who's ever written those things, like, okay, it's still a very tough job. And so long story short, the idea of like, well, where do you think it's headed on the CD side? The landscape it's a moving landscape, and it's a very dynamic landscape, and that's a very good thing. It's a phenomenally good thing. And therefore there needs to be tools getting developed that are designed for dynamic landscapes. And the other thing that I'd say also, this is also because my company does this, there's a workflow around the deployment process. Like up until the point that you've built that container, I'm just assuming we're all on containers. It's not a good assumption, but let's pretend, just for sake of discussion, we've built everything. We built it into a container. Up until that point, everything has been an engineering concern. 100% engineering. We could argue about it all we want, but really, that's really engineering concern. Once you have that thing, it's a product on the shelf. And now that thing has a whole different set of workflows that it goes through. A lot of people are chiming in on it. Like, what version do we want? Where is this one been tested? We got a QA person, we got an SRE, we got a product manager, we've got all these people that may not even have anything to do with code writing or tech, but they are chiming in on the process itself. Well, if we can automate that CD process to a point where it becomes intuitive and a simple tool that it allows the autonomy of the rest of the team, well, you can see where the CD process would want to keep up with that. And you'd want to be able to say, hey, look, we have a release automation process that enables all the various people on the team. Instead of it being a centralized additional burden for those engineers, it's now more of a team effort, and everybody sort of contributes to that. I could go on and on, but you get what I mean, right?
Yeah. Mark, in the early stages, CI/CD, right? It was a slower process, right? We didn't have the vast majority of technology we did back then. The automation, you talked about Terraform, AWS deployment. There's so many ways that you can deploy CI/CD, whether you do a portion of it, you do the complete, the automation. How has technology changed, evolved around the CI/CD, and how is it going to change?
I think there's a lot of new things that we can think of doing, because we have just so many cool tools out there, and there's so, like I just said, we've got scripted architecture. I mean, hell, that's never happened in the history of the planet. You can turn around and just say, voila, there's a thing that what didn't used to be, and it's totally in the shape of the things that we need. That's incredible. And so there's also, like I said, all these different processes that we've developed, that are now changing a little bit because people have a little more autonomy and empowerment in them. And so the ability to say, well, these processes that are getting put together, that are now possible, there's a gap, or there's an existing paradigm that's in place already. And if you're one of those guys we talked to who, I got 150 services and we're deploying out to 5 different environments. Well, was that 150 times 5? Is that 750? Is that 750
Yes.
pipelines?
Yep.
Just doing the math.
I did it at 150, 150, 300, 600,
Yeah.
150. All right, there we go. Break it down.
It's pretty dismal math. And to think, like, I have 750 pipelines. Do we really have 750 pipelines? Probably not. We probably got some sort of leverage in between them and all. But the fact is, like, we're not going to walk in and be like, oh yeah, sure, let's just throw them out and let's just bring the new tool in. It's like, no, there is some equal amount of creativity that you have to bring into not only the new stuff that you can do, but also in how do we fit it into the current state of things? Because obviously everybody's been through it. Greenfield is so much fun. It's great to talk greenfield and stuff, but the reality is, like, look, everybody's got these processes. A lot of good men have died putting these things together. There's a lot of awful things that have happened along the road in this, and so we've spent a lot of money and we've gone through a lot of heartache, and a lot of people are going to say, look, how does it fit with our stuff? Because we're not just going to tear down what we have. And so that's a really creative process, and to say, well, all right, we've got pipelines in place. The CD thing is an evolving landscape. There's a huge amount of opportunity out there to just cut down so much work and to propel companies forward with it. Can we use it with our existing? Yes. Yes, there are ways to do that, and there are a lot of patterns that we implement in my own company. But I can just speak from experience. Like there are a lot of different ways and approaches to making sure that, okay, here's your process here. Here's a good point in that process where we can branch out and go in this direction, and we can maintain all of your existing stuff along with it. I think that's really the unique and interesting challenge there. I mean, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know if you'd have one of like a new thing that you're like, yes. And then you're like, I don't know how I'm going to fit that sofa in my living room. I love that sofa, whatever that is, right? Whatever. I can't think of an example of that, but we've all been through that at some point. Like, I love the idea, but we've got too much going on here. I can't see how that's going to happen.
Oh, that happens all the time where I just even think about home improvements or, oh, we can add this to the yard. We can do this over here. Can I really fit that there? Is it just going to be, is it time, effort of implementation of getting it done? It
Mhm.
happens every day in life. Mark, before I wrap things up, we talked about CI/CD, not only the definition of it, the implementation, where it was, where it started, where it come from. Should everybody do it? Implementing just CI and the CD portion, and how technology has changed and evolved CI/CD. My last question for you is, where is it heading?
It's a good question. I can tell you where I hope it heads, and I think that, like I said, there, couple it into context with all the stuff that's going on right now. Uh, Scripted architecture for one, and the environments on demand is another, and then the fact that CI/CD has been around for such a long time. There is this notion that, well, remember that block of wood? We carved this beautiful CI/CD pipeline out of it. It's a great statue that we're all proud of. Um, that's a lot less art and a lot more science today. And so if you looked at it like, well, hey, there's a lot of things that we can do to automate the processes that are on the outside of it. There's new people we can bring into the process. So I think, to put it simply, I think CI, the build process, will probably remain in the CI/CD space more or less as it is. Like that is probably always going to be there because that build process, it's engineering centric, it's needed, it's one to one on each service, and if you can leverage many to one, great, or one to many, great. But the CD process is going to become a more team oriented, more team driven, less engineering centric process. I think the more you pick up a tool and you're thinking less about it and more about what you want to do with it, the more it evolves into interesting directions. I think that's where the landscape of CD is doing that with all of these, like I said, with environments on demand, with team members becoming more empowered and autonomous in the process, with all the tech that's out there and all the possibilities, and then on top of it, we're not deploying to the server anymore. We're deploying all over the world. We're deploying to IoT devices. We're deploying to wearables. Deploying to game servers. Like there's all kinds of different places we're deploying. And so, again, what if that process was not so engineering centric and was more sort of creatively centric? A lot of changes happening there. So
Mark, I love the analogy. If you have a tool and you think less about the tool and more what you can do about it, I just envisioned a hammer. I am thinking less about the hammer and what it looks like and more about the things that I can build with this hammer and accomplish.
yeah, right on. Yeah, exactly. And
So,
even the hammer evolves a little bit itself, but it's yeah, I think when you get the tools out of the way, one of the things I work with my team on a lot is that there's this notion of the best design for something is actually invisible. And what that means is exactly what you just said. Like I pick the hammer up, and as far as I'm concerned, it's part of my arm. I don't, I'm not thinking of, oh, hey, this is a great hammer or anything, or I'm just busy working that board that I'm trying to put into place.
I like it. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining me again on this awesome podcast around CICD.
Yeah, thanks, John. Always a pleasure.
All right, everybody, this has been another Jon Myer podcast. And as always, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify because guess what? We're out of here.